Welcome to the Roundtable at Pulaski Heights United Methodist Church, a podcast of discussions with substance. Join our staff and leaders of our church as we journey through topics that inform, engage, and inspire the daily life of our church.
Hello and welcome to Pulaski Heights United Methodist Church's The Roundtable, a podcast with substance. We're in the process. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the local church and its structure, the polity of the United Methodist Church. Last week, we talked about the annual conference, which is our statewide group of connected United Methodist churches, and our jurisdictional conference, which is made up of several churches in our region of United Methodist and how they meet. I know you wanted to go back and say one thing about annual conference, and it's an important thing for a lot of our churches.
Well, it has to do with local churches and annual conferences and bishops, which we talked about last week. And that's the appointment system. Right. That is something that is the way that we have our appointment system is unique to Methodism, in that. Pastors are, when we talked about those ordination services where they are ordained within the annual conference, and then the bishop, along with what we call the appointive cabinet, which is made up of district superintendents, as well as others that the bishop can have as part of that cabinet. But they work along with churches to send clergy to the churches within the bounds of the annual conference.
United Methodist
churches within the bounds of the annual conference. And clergy, they are appointed. They are sent. And that the appointment season, so to speak, usually starts in February or March. And then the year after the annual conference, the appointive year for most clergy starts July 1st.
And then there's also a kitchen cabinet season as well, right? Yes. So that's where everyone gets to guess.
Everyone who doesn't actually have any authority or voice in this process.
Kind of keep a bingo card, you know.
Yes.
So today we're talking about the worldwide church, the general conference. We are a connectional church. We have people that are United Methodist in Africa and Europe and the Philippines. We have Methodists all over the world. United Methodists are in certain places, and they're in what's called the central conferences. And then, as we talked about last week, we have the jurisdictional conferences in the U.S. What is the benefit of being a worldwide church?
Maybe it's even selfish to say, but we are so, and this is probably true of a lot of places, but to be a United States or from what we consider the West, we're so insular, and we have spent so much time as a country and as a society trying to ignore other cultures. And we now come to a day and age in which our church is global, and we understand the richness of that, of understanding and knowing and being connected to people that are completely different from us but are working towards the kingdom of God, is a really profound thing. There's huge benefit to that.
Yeah. It allows us to do, we get to learn from each other all over the world and take, trips to learn from each other, but it also allows us to do work together for the betterment of the world and to be able to engage churches from many different continents to address various issues, like Imagine No Malaria, which was an effort by United Methodists to help deal with the malaria crisis. And that is something that United Methodists all over the world got to be a part of and got to address together. Not just the ones who are directly affected by it. And so it helps us, I think, be more mindful both of the needs that we share with those that are right next to us and of the needs of everyone all over the world, and remember that we're all dealing with different things and we can all be helpful to one another as well.
And along with that, one of my favorite ministries or aspects of us being a global denomination is our global ministries. As part of our global ministries is the United Methodist Committee on Relief, that works all over the world to address effects of natural disasters and climate change, but also human rights issues, and serves all over the globe. And United Methodist across the globe participate in that. And UMCOR has gone through a lot of changes and made some changes. But we have voices from those areas. It's not just us from the U.S. saying this is what people need across the world, but because we are a global denomination and there are churches on Maui that is being affected by these wildfires, and we have churches in Ukraine, and we have churches in Kenya. Like, we have churches all over the world that are affected by things. And those pastors and those churches say, these are things that we need, and it gives voice to that relief and that ministry that is, I think, a huge gift.
So what's the hardest thing about being a global church?
That we all come from different places and cultures. I think that's the greatest gift and also the greatest challenge. When it comes to talking about theology, when it comes to talking about biblical interpretation, that's a great challenge.
Diverse voices can produce a lot of beauty and a lot of new things and open each other up to a lot of new things, but those diverse voices can be much more challenging to get to agree. The more you have, the harder it is to get people in agreement. And
especially when one section of the world is used to getting their way.
Yes.
So it is horribly hard, because the United Methodist Church in the U.S. has had the power and control since its inception. And now we're seeing things change.
Yes.
The General Conference is not equitable as far as its membership goes, because it is, very U.S. centric.
Right.
And I remember being at a General Conference one year, 92, in Louisville, Kentucky. And all of I forget what they're called, but it's like the British Methodists. They have voice, a couple of delegates, no vote. And this one lady from Great Britain stood up and she said, I sure do wish that all you United States Methodists would get your stuff together and we can move on with stuff that affects the rest of the world. And I think about that every General Conference, because so much of the legislation, so much of what the time is spent on has to do with the U.S.
Yes.
So
things that affect us.
Yes.
Well, and that is our dreadful sin that we have to really sit with, especially as we look at what is the future of the church, is that the theological beauty of the church to call everyone the body of Christ means we also have to value and care about all the parts of the body of Christ. And Paul tells us that in the Bible. But we also live in a world where our church sometimes doesn't even agree with what our majority poll is on certain things. And so it's hard. It's really hard.
Because the General Conference is one that they spend, it used to be 2 weeks, now it's 10 days. It will meet in late April, early May of 2024. And this has been postponed because of the pandemic. So it's actually the 2020 General Conference in 2024, with talks of having a 2024 and 2026, and then being back on track in 2028. Now, that may or may not happen.
So much.
But there will be a lot of legislation, and General Conference is broken down into committees that deal with the polity of the church, that deals with I can't even remember all the the committees there are. Some have to do with the local church, some have to do with jurisdictions, some have to do with, I mean, there's just a breakdown of many, many different committees.
Creating a new hymnal.
Yeah. And so they take all the legislation that's come in from around the world, and they break that legislation down by committee. And sometimes they will send it to another committee saying, this is not our area. We need to send it over here. So there will be one, we talked about this last week, legislation to make the U.S. its own central conference.
Or to make the jurisdictions within the U.S.
And the reason I'm getting that confused, because I said that last week too, there was another one where it was going to be U.S. was
the only.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So now
But I believe that the main one that's being put forward
yes.
this time
Jurisdictional.
is to make jurisdictionals function like central conferences.
There will be a lot of changes. There will be a lot of legislation around LGBTQ equality and inequality. That'll be a big hot topic, as it has been for the last 40, 50 years. But anyway, it's in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it will be there will be a lot of people's eyes on that conference.
And it's worth noting that we have a couple of lay members of Pulaski Heights that are on the delegation, and so that's important to know that Pulaski Heights, at our local church,
Right.
has folks that have been voted on by our annual conference to represent to represent us.
Yeah, I think it's important to note how that delegation comes about, that people, that was actually my first annual conference, was 2019 when we elected this delegation, that people can submit their name ahead of time at annual conference, and then you are nominated, and then the annual conference does multiple ballots to elect the folks that are going to be going, both the clergy that will be going and the laity, and that's an equal number of both.
And clergy vote for clergy,
exactly.
and laity vote for
Right.
laity.
And and one of the interesting things about that is the clergy are much more connected than the laity are, because you're in meetings, with the same people over and over again. The laity are not as connected, and so unless they're connected to one of the committees of the annual conference, or they know each other through United Women in Faith, or through youth ministry, or something like that. And so it's always interesting. It's not as backbiting as electing bishops at jurisdictional conference, but I mean, it's you have a lot of people that it is political,
Yes.
and so that's when we need a triple dose of worship at annual conference. And it's people that are arguing and wanting to elect people that reflect what they believe.
Right.
And so trying to find trying to look at the delegation, and say, what's the balance of men and women? What's the balance of deacon and elder? What's the balance of age? Because some people would wear it as a badge of courage if they've been to every general conference since John Wesley was here.
Yeah.
And there are no, there's not really. But you were going to say something, Kathleen.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Sorry.
But anyway, general conference. Does it help or hurt us to have this large body with? I'm struggling to connect what we do in the jurisdiction to what we do in the general conference arena. And that, like, for example, we have part of the general conference work is something called the Judicial Council, electing the Judicial Council. That's like the Supreme Court of the United Methodist Church. And so any rules of law go to them for interpretation. It's interesting to me, I don't even remember where I'm going with this, but no, I really do. But it's interesting to me that, that piece of just the balance of, because they can only rule on what's in the Book of Discipline.
The Judicial Council.
The Judicial Council can. But there would, like, for example,
like the Supreme Court can only rule on what's in the Constitution.
That's right.
Yes.
And in Tampa, at that General Conference, the first week is all committees, and then it moves into plenary. And we worked on all this stuff for a whole week. It occupied everything. A lot of legislation didn't even make it to the table.
Right.
And on the last day, everything we had done was ruled out of order.
Oof.
And a judicial council made a declaration on that. And so anyway, that General Conference costs a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
When a lot of our, especially if the U.S., if the jurisdictions become central conferences, then your jurisdictional conference, what is now the jurisdictional conference, basically could become like a general conference. And then you get together the worldwide church to have worship and celebrate each other.
And you still have the connections. I mean, you can still do some of those things like missions and, connect
Absolutely.
on a local level. Yeah. I mean, I think that would be a positive.
But I hope, the United Methodist people that love, the polity of the church and, all 2 or 3 people that have watched all 3 of these episodes. But I hope that they'll be in prayer for our, delegation. Absolutely. And for our general and jurisdictional conferences that are coming up. And anything else that you all want to add about General Conference?
I would say that, as especially we come into a time that has been kind of contentious as we go through these general conferences and then they get delayed and all of that other business. When we're thinking about youth ministry and what we are teaching our young people, or teaching folks that maybe this wasn't on your radar until you listened to these podcasts, or maybe it wasn't on your radar until we started making news headlines over something, because of the way that General Conference is really political. Sometimes we get really confused. I would call it confusion to say that this political arena or this body of people that joins at the General Conference is the church, and then we at the local level are just like some goobers. And I think that is really quite the opposite, that when we see the politics that play out and it can be very emotional to watch General Conference. It can be very upsetting, no matter.
People are mean.
People are
Yes.
mean, or we hear about things that are, really, we feel like people aren't following all the same rules that we would or ethics that we would. It's very upsetting. And we can go, I don't want to be a part of the church because that's the church. And I hope that we all recognize that is this meeting of people that's trying to make decisions, but the church is on the local level. It's the place where when you are dying, your pastor comes and sits with you, and you worship on a Sunday morning, and you bring your food to the food pantry, and we're doing the work on the floor. That's the church. And yes, this global body represents these churches getting together, but I hope that we continue to not lose sight of what the church is and what the church does and what makes the church really meaningful. It's not the political parts or the parts where we make big declarations about things most of the time. It's the little things that we're doing right here in Arkansas.
And you really want General Conference to almost be a peaceable kingdom.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the goal. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, we were talking about committees at General Conference a minute ago. Church and Society, because there's so much there, has 2. One only deals with social principles, and the rest deal with all other things, Church and Society.
And the Committee for Church and Society has to do with the General Board of Church and Society, which is
Headquartered in D.C.
In a very prominent...
On Capitol Hill.
On Capitol Hill. And deals with our communal political presence.
Yes.
Yep.
Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there for.
Yep.
Yeah,
folks.
it's right across from the Capitol. It's wedged in between the Supreme Court, one of the Senate buildings, and the Capitol. So if you go to D.C., I hope you'll stop by, because they love to have United Methodists come by and visit. It is the only non-governmental building on Capitol Hill, and we've had it since the 1920s, I believe. So I think we just celebrated 100 years there. There's also apartments in that, and we rent out space to other ecumenical groups on Capitol Hill. The Committee on Conferences is exactly what it says. It's about the annual conference. There's a Committee on Discipleship. Another goes back to the Board of Discipleship, which is one of our global boards and agencies.
Our higher education, which is really important both for our seminaries and our Methodist colleges all over the world.
And higher education is paired with superintendency, which, okay.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's whatever. There's local church ministry, judicial administration.
Which has to do with that judicial council bodies.
Independent commissions, which is like UMCOM and other, I believe that's right. I was on independent commissions one time. Global ministries, general administration, financial administration, faith and order, which is a highly contested conference committee spot to get. And yeah, it has to do with ordination. It has to do with how we view our elders and deacons, licensed local pastors, the whole gamut. So,
well, and I'll say too, as you know, for those of you listening, again, if you were newer to our United Methodist structure, you will notice a lot of similarities with the structure of our U.S. governmental political system because we grew up at the same time.
Right.
That this denomination was growing up and being formed at the same time that the U.S. government was.
Yeah.
And so the way that we have committees, just like there are committees for Congress, and the way that you've got these three branches.
Right.
The judiciary, congressional or legislative, and then executive.
Which I'm not sure we've really talked about our executive branch by name, but our Council of Bishops is our executive branch. There's not just one particular person, unlike some denominations which have a singular leader. Yeah,
Right.
We don't have a vote.
So
yeah, we have this
council, and including retired bishops.
Yes.
So yeah, they get together.
And that's also to say, you know, that's part of the values of United Methodism, especially as it became Americanized, is the reason we have all of these delegations and all these big conferences and all this other stuff is that we believe that there shouldn't just be one person making all the decisions. And
there's a reason we don't have a pope.
Right.
United Methodism naturally lives in a place where we really try to value every single voice. And we're not always successful at that. But that is the impulse of our faith, which I think is really special.
Yeah.
Do you think that if people tuned in and watched the live stream of General Conference, and they were thinking about becoming a United Methodist or even a Christian? Well, that's all the time we have. No, I mean, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
If they tuned into the worship, they might like it. If they tuned into the business sessions, maybe not.
I know it's a fine balance, and I don't know. We'll see what happens in May, though, and so another something to keep in your prayers as we move that way. Any closing thoughts? All right. Well, this has been the Roundtable, a podcast with substance, discussion with substance. And I'm Jay Clark, and for all of us here, just keep moving on. Yeah. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.